"Do not startle, and do not look at me as though I have lost my reason," the Duke of Undermere said under his breath, sliding onto the bench beside a woman he had never met. "For the next quarter of an hour, madam, I need you to act as though you are mine." Aldous Hartcliffe, ninth Duke of Undermere, had crossed the whole length of Lady Pruett's ballroom to say it, and he watched the young woman's face with the flat calculation of a man who had learned to weigh people in a single glance. She had been sitting alone against the wall the entire evening, half hidden by a marble urn and a fern, a plain gray shawl over a gown 2 seasons out of fashion, her gloved hands folded in her lap as though she had made peace with being invisible. That was precisely why he had chosen her. A woman no one watched was a woman no one would question. She turned her head slowly and looked at him. She did not gasp. She did not simper. She only studied him with a pair of steady hazel eyes, and there was something in them that was not fear at all but a kind of grave amusement, as if a very large and dangerous dog had trotted up and laid its head in her lap. "Yours, your grace," she repeated. "That is a great deal to ask of a stranger you have not troubled to greet." "I am greeting you now." "You are commandeering me." But she did not rise, and she did not call for anyone, and Aldous felt the first thin thread of relief loosen in his chest. Across the room, near the doors, a woman in emerald silk had appeared on the arm of a lean, smiling man with too many rings. Lady Corisande Vane. Aldous did not look at her directly. He had spent 3 years learning not to look directly at Corisande Vane. It was she who had jilted him at the very door of the church, she who had married a viscount for his money and buried him within the year, and it was she who had come to this ball tonight for one purpose only, to find the Duke of Undermere still unwed, still wounded, still hers to reclaim at her leisure. He had read it in the letter she had sent that morning. "I hear you have never recovered. How sweet! I shall come and see for myself." He would sooner have swallowed glass. "There is a woman by the door," he said quietly, "in green. Do not turn to see her. She believes I have spent 3 years pining after her. I intend to disabuse her of that belief tonight, and I have no one to help me do it. Sit near me. Laugh once or twice as though I have said something worth laughing at. Let her see that the Duke of Undermere is not a man waiting to be collected." The young woman was silent for a moment. Then, astonishingly, she laughed. A low, warm, entirely natural laugh, exactly as instructed, and it was so well done that Aldous nearly laughed himself out of sheer surprise. "There," she said, "was that convincing?" "Alarmingly so." "I have a great deal of practice sitting quietly and observing people, your grace. One learns how a real laugh sounds when one is not often the cause of one." She smoothed her glove. "I will help you. Not because you commanded it, I dislike being commanded, but because I know that woman by her reputation, and I find I would enjoy watching her lose. My name is Marielle Hensworth. If we are to be a couple, you had better know it." "Hensworth?" He searched his memory and found nothing which pleased him. "You are not on the lists." "No, my father was a country clergyman with more books than living. I am here on the charity of a second cousin who forgets my name and seats me behind the ferns." She said it without bitterness, as a simple fact of weather. "Now, if I am yours, your grace, you must at least tell me your Christian name, or I shall call you sir, and ruin the whole performance." "Aldous." "Aldous." She tried it, and something in the plainness of the syllables in her mouth caught him off guard. No one used it. His mother had used it, and his mother was 11 years dead. "Then, Aldous, offer me your arm and take me somewhere we can be seen, and stop staring at the door as though it might bite you." He rose. He offered his arm. And Marielle Hensworth in her out-of-fashion gown placed her hand upon the sleeve of the Duke of Undermere and walked out from behind the ferns as though she had every right in the world to be there. They made a slow circuit of the room. He was aware, with the cold clarity that never left him in company, of heads turning, of the small ripple that followed him everywhere, of the whispers he had long ago stopped bothering to hear. But tonight the whispers had a new note in them, a note of confusion because the Duke of Undermere, who danced with no one, who spoke to no one, who had turned to stone the day Corisande Vane walked out of that church, was walking the room with a plain girl on his arm and inclining his head to hear what she said. And what she said was worth hearing. That was the thing he had not accounted for. She had a dry, quick way of seeing people. As they passed a knot of gentlemen debating the price of corn, she murmured, "The stout one has already changed his opinion twice tonight. He is waiting to hear which way the room will lean before he commits his own conscience." As they passed a girl weeping prettily behind her fan, she said, "That is her third season and her mother's patience is at an end. The tears are for the mother, not for us." She was never cruel. She simply saw, the way a person who has spent years against the wall learns to see, and Aldous, who had believed himself the most watchful man in any room, found himself outmatched and for the first time in 3 years entertained. Then Corisande Vane crossed their path, and the performance began in earnest. "Undermere," she said, in the low, warm, practiced voice he had once thought was meant only for him, "how thin you look. Grief does not suit you." Her eyes went to Marielle and swept her up and down and dismissed her in the same motion, the way one dismisses a servant who has wandered into the wrong room. "And who is this?" "Lady Corisande," Aldous said. His voice came out level. "May I present Miss Hensworth?" "Hensworth?" Corisande smiled. "I don't believe I know the family." "You would not," Marielle agreed pleasantly. "We are very small and very happy, which tends to keep one out of the larger conversations." She smiled up at Aldous with a warmth so convincing that he felt it land somewhere beneath his ribs. "I have been trying all evening to persuade His Grace that he owes the room at least one dance, and he will not be moved. He says he dances only when it means something. I confess I don't know whether to be flattered or exhausted." It was perfectly done. It said, without a single indelicate word, that this plain girl had access to the Duke's private opinions, his stubbornness, his tenderness, that she and he had an asterisk understanding asterisk, that whatever Corisande Vane had come here to reclaim was already quietly spoken for. And Aldous watched the smile on Corisande's face freeze at the edges, watched her recalculate, and felt a savage, silent satisfaction that surprised him with its sweetness. "How charming," Corisande said and moved on. They walked to the far end of the room in silence. Then Marielle said, very softly, "She hurt you a great deal." "That is not part of the performance." "No," Marielle agreed. "It isn't, but it is true, and I would rather you know that I saw it so you do not have to spend the evening pretending you are made of iron. I don't believe iron laughs the way you nearly did when I laughed at nothing." She looked up at him. "You may keep your secrets, Your Grace. I only wanted you to know they are in the hands of someone who will not use them." He did not know what to say to that. He was a man to whom no one had said a kind thing in a great while that did not want something in return, and here was a girl he had commandeered from behind a fern, offering him quiet and asking for nothing. "Dance with me," he heard himself say. She blinked. That was not the arrangement. "You said I owed the room a dance." He held out his hand. "Let it mean something, then. Let it mean I am grateful." And the Duke of Undermere, who had not danced in 3 years, led a clergyman's daughter in an unfashionable gray gown onto the floor, and the whole room stopped to watch. She danced beautifully. He had not expected that either. In her worn gown she moved as though the music were something she had known all her life and merely lent out to lesser dancers on occasion, and she watched his face rather than his feet, and when the figure of the dance brought them close she said, low enough for him alone, "You are frowning. Frowning ruins the effect. Try to look at least a little as though you are enjoying yourself." "I do not enjoy being watched." "You have been watched your entire life, Your Grace. You may as well give them something worth the trouble." And she smiled at him, not the performing smile but a smaller, truer one, and Aldous found that his frown had gone somewhere and he could not get it back. When the dance ended he did not release her hand at once. He was aware that he should. He was aware that Corisande Vane had left, that the performance was over, that the debt was paid and the girl was free to return to her ferns. He was aware, too, that he did not want her to. "May I call on your cousin?" he said abruptly. to thank her for the introduction. Marielle's brows lifted. There was no introduction. You commandeered me from behind a plant. Then I shall call to invent one. She looked at him for a long moment, and the grave amusement came back into her eyes. Your Grace, she said gently, you do not have to manufacture a reason to be kind to me, and you do not have to be kind to me at all. The arrangement is finished. You are a very great man, and I am a girl who will go home in a hired chair and mend this gown, and by tomorrow you will have forgotten my name. Marielle, he said before he had decided to. Marielle Hensworth, clergyman's daughter, too many books, too little living. He watched her go still. I have not forgotten it. I find I do not intend to. He called the next day. Her cousin, Mrs. Farthing, was so overcome by the sight of the Duke of Undermere's carriage in her street that she could scarcely speak, and spent the entire visit pushing forward her own 2 daughters, both of whom were prettier than Marielle and both of whom bored Aldous within 4 minutes. Marielle sat by the window with her mending and said little, and every time the conversation flagged, she rescued it with a single dry remark that made him want to laugh, and did not once try to make him look at her. When he rose to go, he crossed to the window instead of the door. You did not join the campaign, he said quietly. For your hand, no, she bit off a thread. I know what I am, your Grace, I know what you are. A duke does not marry the girl he hid behind a fern. He marries a courtesan vain or someone very like her, and I would rather be your peculiar acquaintance than one more woman flinging herself at your feet for you to step over. I have some pride. It is nearly all I have. I should like to keep it. And if I told you, he said slowly, that I have had a great many women flung at my feet, and that the only company I have enjoyed in 3 years is that of a woman who told me to stop frowning and hid nothing behind her eyes. She looked up at him. I would tell you that a man who has been badly wounded often mistakes the first person who is kind to him for the last person he will ever need. It is a common error. I have no wish to be an error. It should have angered him. Instead, it steadied something in him. Here was a woman who would not be flattered, would not be bought, would not be swept along, who was, in fact, protecting him from himself as much as herself. He had spent 3 years surrounded by people who told him what he wished to hear. He had forgotten that there was any other kind. The weeks that followed rearranged the Duke of Undermere, without his ever quite consenting to it. He had ordered his life since the ruin at the church into a kind of fortress. He rose early and rode alone. He attended to his estates with a cold competence that left his stewards half in awe and half in terror. He appeared in society only when duty compelled it and left the moment duty was discharged. He had built the fortress deliberately, stone by stone, so that nothing could reach him again as Khorasan Vane had reached him, and for 3 years it had held. He had mistaken its silence for peace. Now, every Thursday, he found a breach in his own walls, and the breach was a shabby drawing-room in an unfashionable street, where a clergyman's daughter sat mending by a window and told him the truth. He courted her the way he did everything, methodically and without mercy, but it was a courtship unlike any the world had seen from him. He sent no jewels because she would have sent them back. He sent books, rare ones with certain passages marked, and she wrote him back 3 pages disagreeing with the passages, which he read 4 times. He did not shower her with visits. He came at the same hour each week and sat by the window and let her cousin push forward the prettier daughters while he watched Marielle mend and listened to her see the world. He learned that her father had died owing money, that she had sold his library 1 volume at a time to keep them fed, that she had refused 2 respectable offers from men who wanted a housekeeper they need not pay, and that she had not wept when she told him any of it. He noticed things he had no business noticing. He noticed that her boots were mended more than once, and that she never let him see it if she could help it, tucking her feet beneath her chair. He noticed that when Mrs. Farthing said something unkind, the woman had a gift for small cruelties disguised as concern. Marielle never answered in kind, but only went a little quieter, and that the quiet cost her, and that she paid it rather than descend to her cousin's level. He noticed that she gave the heels of the tea-cakes to the sparrows on the sill, unthinking, and that the sparrows knew her and came. "You are staring at me again, your grace," she said one Thursday, not looking up from her needle. "It is disconcerting. I begin to fear I have ink on my nose." "You have ink on your nose almost always," he said. "It is one of your more reliable features. No, I was thinking that you feed the birds the best part of the cake and keep the plainer part for yourself, and that you do it without noticing, and that a person's unnoticed habits tell you more than all their speeches." She looked up at that, and a faint color came into her face. "And what do mine tell you?" "That you have spent your life giving away the best part," he said, "and calling it nothing." Marielle set down her mending. For a moment neither of them spoke, and the sparrows quarreled on the sill, and the fire settled in the grate. Then she said, too lightly, "You are a very dangerous man, your grace. You say true things to a woman that no one has ever bothered to say, and you do not seem to understand that this is a cruelty when there can be nothing at the end of it. You are the Duke of Undermere, and I am the girl you hid behind a fern, and no amount of true things said by a fireside will make the world otherwise." "I have had a Khorasan vein," Aldous said, and the old name came out of him more steadily than it had in 3 years. "She was beautiful and correct and suitable in every particular, and she left me at the door of the church for a richer man, and I do not think, looking back, that she ever once said a true thing to me in the whole of our acquaintance. You have never once said the things a woman says to a duke. Do you know what that is worth to a man who has been lied to pleasantly his entire life?" "It is worth nothing," Marielle said, but her voice had lost its lightness, "if it cannot be kept." He carried the phrase home with him, turning it over asterisk if it cannot be kept asterisk, and understood that she was refusing him not out of pride alone, though she had pride enough, but because she had already begun to care, and a woman who has begun to care cannot bear to be picked up and set down again as a great man's passing fancy. So he began, quietly, to lay siege to the world instead of to her. He let it be known, in the places where such things are known, that the Duke of Undermere held Miss Hensworth in high regard. He called on old friends of his mother's, formidable dowagers with long memories, and spoke of Marielle with a plain respect that set them wondering. He could not make the world kind, but he could make it quiet, and quiet was all she needed to be safe. What he had not reckoned on was Khorasan Vane, who had watched all of this with the cold attention of a woman who has lost something and cannot bear that it should belong to anyone else. She had not gone away after the ball. She had gone to think, and what she had thought was that the Duke of Undermere had never in 3 years shown the smallest sign of attachment to any woman, and that his sudden devotion to a penniless nobody was too strange to be real. She made inquiries. She found Mrs. Farthing, who was vain and talkative and eager to be noticed by a great lady, and she got from her, over tea and flattery, the whole story. How the Duke had never been introduced at all, how he had simply appeared beside Marielle at the ball and swept her onto the floor, how it had all begun that single night as if by arrangement. And Khorasan, being clever and cruel in equal measure, understood at once what it had been. A performance, a device. The great Duke of Undermere, too proud to be seen still bleeding, had hired a plain girl's face for an evening to spite the woman who jilted him. She told Marielle first. That was the cruelty of it. She called on Mrs. Farthing at an hour she knew the Duke would not be there, and she sat across from Marielle with her emerald eyes bright and said, sweetly, as though doing her a kindness, "I do hope you have not let yourself hope, Miss Hensworth. I know what you were to him that night. He told me himself, more or less, that he needed someone unremarkable to make me jealous, and you were sitting conveniently to hand. You do understand. You were a stage prop, my dear, a rather good one, but one does not marry the scenery." Aldous learned of it that evening, when he arrived at the appointed hour and found Marielle's chair by the window empty, and Mrs. Farthing wringing her hands, and a letter on the sill in a plain, upright hand. "Your Grace," it read, "I have been told the truth of how our acquaintance began, and I find I cannot fault you for it is exactly what I said at the outset, that a duke does not marry the girl he hides behind a fern. You were kind to me, and I will not pretend the kindness meant nothing. It meant a great deal, which is precisely why I must not stay to watch it turn into pity or, worse, into obligation. I release you from any imagined debt. You paid it the night you asked me to dance, and let it mean something. Let that be the last thing it means. I have gone to take a governess's post in the north, arranged some weeks ago against exactly this kind of foolishness. Do not follow me. You would only be mistaking the first kind person for the last, and I told you I have no wish to be in error. Be well, Aldous. I am glad iron can laugh. M.H. He read it standing in the middle of Mrs. Farthing's shabby drawing-room, and for the first time in 3 years the Duke of Undermere felt something crack all the way through, and it was not his pride. "When did she leave?" he said. This afternoon, your Grace, the northern coach. She would not be argued with. Lady Vane had called, and afterward Marielle was so quiet, and then she packed her one box and he was already gone. The road north was bad, and the light was failing, and Aldous drove his own team from the box because he could not sit still inside the carriage and be carried. He had done that once before, sat still and been carried, on the morning of his wedding, while the world quietly arranged his humiliation around him, and he had sworn he would never again be a passenger in his own life. So he took the reins from his astonished coachman and drove, and the miles unspooled behind him in the cold, and he had a great deal of time to think, which was the last thing he wanted. He thought of the fern and the grave hazel eyes that had not simpered. He thought of the note she had left, and of the phrase in it that had opened him like a blade. I am glad iron can laugh. He thought of every Thursday, of the mended boots tucked out of sight, of the sparrows on the sill, of 3 pages disagreeing with him about a book. And he understood, somewhere around the 5th changing of the horses, driving through country he did not know toward a woman who had told him plainly not to follow, that Corisande Vane had done him one last, unintended kindness. She had told the truth, that Marielle had begun as a device, and by telling it cruelly she had forced him to look at what the device had become, and to see, at last and all at once, that he had stopped performing weeks ago, that the frown had gone somewhere and he could not get it back, and that the reason was a clergyman's daughter with ink on her nose whom he loved past all sense or safety, and had been too much a coward to tell. The northern coach changed horses at a coaching inn called the Blackthorn, some 40 miles out of town, and it was there, in the yard, in a cold blue dusk, that the Duke of Undermere's own team overtook it, lathered and blowing, having been driven harder than his coachman had ever dared drive them. Marielle was standing by the inn door with her single box at her feet, waiting for the fresh horses to be put to, her gray shawl pulled close against the evening chill. She saw the crest on the carriage door and went very still, and when Aldous swung down and crossed the yard toward her, she did not run and she did not smile. She only lifted her chin in that grave, steady way, the way she had looked at him the very first moment, as if bracing to be told once more that she was scenery. "You read my letter," she said. "I read it 4 times. I read everything you write 4 times. He stopped an arm's length from her. The ostlers had frozen where they stood, the coachman had gone quiet, the whole yard was watching, and for once in his life Aldous Hartcliffe did not care who watched. "Lady Vane told you a truth and dressed it as the whole truth. It is true that I came to you that night because I needed someone the room would not question. It is true that you began as a device. I will not insult you by pretending otherwise. You would see through it, you always see through everything." "Then we are agreed," she said, "and you have driven 40 miles to tell me what I already—" "I am not finished." He heard his own voice roughen and let it. "You began as a device, Marielle. You have not been one for a long time. Somewhere between the ferns and the window and the 3 pages you wrote to tell me I was wrong about a book, you stopped being the thing I needed and became the person I want, and there is a great and terrible difference between those 2 words, and I have only just learned it because I am, as you observed, a badly wounded man who is slow to trust his own heart." He took a breath. "You said I would mistake the first kind person for the last. Hear me. You are not the first kind person. You are the first person in 3 years who was kind to me and wanted nothing from me and would not let me buy her and told me to stop frowning. That is not the same thing, and if you make me stand in this filthy yard and explain the difference to you in front of 6 ostlers, I will do it, but I would very much rather you simply believed me." "Belief is a luxury, your grace," she said, and her voice was not quite steady now. "I cannot afford it. If I believe you and I am wrong, I have nothing to fall back upon, no fortune, no family, no name to soften the fall. You may be wrong and lose a season's diversion. I may be wrong and lose the only thing I have kept whole through everything, which is the knowledge that I never once made a fool of myself over a man who could not have meant it. Do you see? It is not that I doubt your feeling tonight. It is that I dare not stake my whole self on whether it lasts past the next glittering room full of Coruscant veins." It was the truest and most frightened thing she had ever said to him, and it undid the last of his pride entirely. He did the thing he had sworn, since the church, he would never do again for any living soul. He laid himself open, with nothing held back to protect him. "Then let me tell you what I stake," he said. "Not a season's diversion, everything. My name, which I have guarded like a miser since the day it was made a joke at a church door, I stake it on you gladly, and let the world say what it will. My pride, which is all I had left after Coruscant, and which I would have told you a month ago was the whole of me, I lay it down in this yard in the mud in front of the ostlers, because I have discovered it was never worth what I paid to keep it. And my trust, Marielle, which is the thing she truly broke, the thing I swore never to give again, I am giving it to you here, knowing you could crush it, because I would rather be broken by you than safe without you. You say you dare not stake your whole self. I have just staked mine. I have driven 40 miles to put it in your hands. What you do with it is yours to choose. But do not tell me I could not have meant it. A man does not lay down everything he owns for a diversion." The yard was silent. Somewhere behind the inn a rooster, confused by the falling dark, gave one uncertain crow and thought better of it. The fresh horses stamped in the traces of the northern coach, ready now, waiting for a passenger who did not move. Marielle's steady hazel eyes had filled, though not one tear fell. She was too proud for that, and he loved her too much to wish it otherwise. "You cannot marry the girl you hid behind a fern," she said, but it came out almost as a question, and the last of her armor was in it, cracking. "I am the Duke of Undermere," he said. "I can marry whom I please, and it does not please me to spend one more evening in any room in England unless you are somewhere in it, telling me the truth. Coruscant Vane offered me a reflection of myself and called it love. You offered me a book I disagreed with and a command to stop frowning, and I have not felt so alive since before the church." He held out his hand, exactly as he had at the ball. "Come home, Marielle, not as a device, not as scenery." As the woman, a proud, foolish, frowning man could not outrun in 40 miles, because she had already got there first, into the middle of him, and would not come out. She looked at his open hand for a long moment. Then she looked up at his face, and slowly the grave amusement returned to her eyes, warmer now, wet at the edges. "You are still frowning," she said. "I know. Stop." And he did. The frown he had worn for 3 years, the frown that had turned a jilted man to stone, went out of his face like a cloud off the moon, and Marielle Hensworth put her hand into the hand of the Duke of Undermere and stepped away from the northern coach and did not go north. The coachman of the northern coach, who had watched the whole of it with his mouth open, took her single box down from the roof without being asked and set it in the Duke's carriage, and touched his hat and looked, for a hardened old driver, unaccountably pleased. They were married before the frost broke, quietly in a small church, with her cousin weeping and the prettier daughters sulking in Coruscant Vane, pointedly not invited. Marielle wore no jewels. She wore a gown the color of dove gray that he had not chosen, and she would not let him pay for, and she was the most beautiful thing in the county, and she laughed at the wrong moment during the vows, and he laughed too in the middle of the church, and the old rector lost his place entirely. In the years that came, the Duke of Undermere was known, to the great confusion of society, as a man who was frequently seen to smile. It was said he had grown soft. It was said his duchess had a sharp tongue and no fortune and read too many books and did not defer to him as a wife ought. All of it was true, and he counted every word of it a compliment, and when strangers asked how it had begun, how the coldest man in England had come to marry a penniless clergyman's daughter no one had ever heard of. He told them the truth, because his wife would tolerate nothing else. "I told her to act as though she were mine," he would say, "for the space of a quarter of an hour. And then he would find her across whatever room they stood in, and she would already be watching him, already seeing straight through him, and he would add more quietly, so that only she could hear it,